So this is Ben from Let Them Eat Bread. Um, this video is uncomfortable for me. I didn't really want to make this video, but I need to speak up about this, and I need to express my views on this because I have waited too long to do so, and I think my perspective might help people. I'm not necessarily trying to change minds, but if you change your mind after listening to me, great. As I said, I didn't want to make this video. I just wanted to mourn the incredible loss of life that is happening in the Middle East right now on my own, in my own time, in my own way. I didn't want people checking on me. I didn't want it to be this great big palaver, but I cannot sit silent any longer while this incredible violence is going on. Look, I'm going to say things that people aren't going to like. No one watching this video, you, the viewer, at some point in this video are going to be mad at something I say. It's the nature of it. I'm coming for everybody. But I do think that my perspective is helpful. I do think it's a little unique. I'm an American Jew who spent time living in Israel, who lived in the West Bank. And I have seen what happens over there, and I know what Israel can be, and I also know what it unfortunately does, and it's just one of those things where I feel that giving that perspective might be helpful to people, especially having lived over there. So here it goes. First of all, obviously, war crimes are bad. It does not matter who commits them. It doesn't matter if it's America or Israel or Hamas or ISIS or the Taliban or China or anywhere else. War crimes are bad and wrong. The reason that we have war crimes in the first place is because after World War II and after the World War I, we saw the terrible, terrible things that humans did to each other. And not that humans haven't been doing terrible things to each other for a really long time, but it was the first time in history that we regular people got to see it, because there was photo evidence, there was video evidence of the types of terrible atrocities that were committed on people during the world wars. And we, the world, most of the world, came together to say, if we're going to have war, which seems to be an inevitability of the human existence, then there need to be some bounds. There have to be things where you say, this is not allowed, okay? So that being said, everyone watching this knows that on October 7th, a terrible, brutal, disgusting attack was levied by Hamas onto the civilians, mostly the civilian population of Israel. And a war crime, one of the many war crimes that are out there, is targeting civilians, and Hamas did that, and that's fucking gross, okay? Everything about that is gross. I don't care if you think that that is a part of the decolonization process. I don't care if you think that Israelis had it coming for whatever disgusting reason, but you're wrong. Those actions are wrong. The seizing of hostages is wrong. Those hostages must be returned, and unfortunately, it seems that about a quarter of the hostages are already dead, which is disastrous, and it's just so disgusting what was done by Hamas on October 7th. And like, period, end of story. There's nothing that changes that at all, okay? Israel went through a terrible calamity on October 7th, and I grieve and I mourn, and it was painful for me to watch and listen to all the accountings of that. War crimes do not justify war crimes. They never have, they never will. The attack on 9/11 was a war crime by Al-Qaeda against the United States. What the United States then went and did to countries that did not attack us were war crimes. The leaders who brought us into that war should be condemned or brought up for charges. Now, I think most of the Al-Qaeda leaders are dead now, so their justice came to them. The same is true for Hamas. Their war crimes do not necessitate the war crimes of other individuals, be they from anywhere. Okay, so what that means is when Israel starts a bombing campaign to level Gaza, and American politicians talk about leveling Gaza, that is a war crime. Those are war crimes. That is the enablement of war crimes. Now, why does what Israel does matter to me? A bunch of reasons. One, because they are doing it in our name. If you listen to the rhetoric of the Israeli government, they say they're doing it for the Jews, of which I am one. Now, I don't agree with that. I'm going to talk a lot about that in a minute. But also, as an American taxpayer, my money, a lot of my money goes to Israel for their defense. And look, I think it's an important thing for Israel to have a right to defend itself. But that being said, they do not get to take that right to defend themselves and manipulate that into the mass slaughter of civilians, the mass relocation of civilians. And if you think that telling a civilian population, move or we will bomb you, is not forced relocation, you are wrong. That is what it is. They don't have to march them handhelding, they don't have to be forcing them by gunpoint in person to move a population for it to be a forced migration. You can threaten to bomb the crap out of them instead, which is what Israel and the IDF threatened to do in our name. Not just Jews, but Americans. So if you're an American, they are using bombs that say Made in America on them. And that's really gross. Anywhere that is using weapons that say Made in America on them, Americans should care what happens with those weapons. Whether they are stockpiled in peacetime bases in Europe near the Russian border, or whether they are stockpiled by nations who are using them in the Middle East, be it Saudi Arabia or Israel or any other nation, okay? So that's why it matters. That's why it matters to me. That's why it should matter to you if you're an American. That's why it should matter to you if you're Jewish, because they're doing it in our name. Now, here's why I want to break down the words and I want to break down all of the individual items here, because I think the way people are talking about this is dangerous. So Zionism and Judaism are not the same. Okay, so I am a Jew, an American Jew, I'm an American-born Jew. I'm born of a Jewish mother, which means I'm ethnically Jewish, I'm culturally Jewish, and I'm religiously Jewish. Okay, Judaism is a complex thing. I've talked about this on the show before. You know, I have past videos on this. Just take a look at them. Judaism is a lot of things, but it is not Zionism. Zionism is the national ambition of the Jewish people, okay? A national ambition of a people does not make it the same as those people. Not every Jew believes in a national ambition. Now, I personally believe in a Jewish homeland, but I don't believe in a Jewish state. What's the difference between those two things? A Jewish state is a religious ethno-state. Unfortunately, it just is. If you say that you have a Jewish state, that means all the mechanisms of the state are going to be Jewish, and that is made for Jewish people. It's like having other theocracies in the Middle East. It's like Iran, who I condemn for being an Islamic theocracy, right? I just don't believe in theocracies. What does a Jewish homeland mean? It's a place that Jews can go and call home safely without, by the way, imposing Judaism on the people who are already living there. In this case, Palestinians, Christians, other Arabs, etc. So you can be against one and not against the other, which brings me to the thing that I think is the most disgusting going on right now, which is the equation of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. I am against Zionism in the form of Jewish ethno-nationalism. I already explained why, but I will. I feel very strongly that you can have a state that is safe for Jewish people without having a state that is Jewish. Now, a Jewish homeland still can use the Jewish calendar. It can still take off for the holidays, just like you have the America is a secular democracy. We get the Christian holidays off. Does that make us a Christian nation? No, it doesn't. It doesn't even make us a Christian homeland, by the way, but lots of Christians feel comfortable here, and the United States was founded by Christians. So if you wanted, you could say America is a Christian homeland, but that doesn't make us a Christian nation, right? So this is the same kind of thing. I want there to be a Jewish homeland, a state where Jews can feel comfortable being Jewish, feel safe being Jewish, but I don't want a Jewish nation. I don't want a nation that is about the religion of Judaism to the detriment or the pushing out of other religions, okay? That's where I stand on it. And so does that mean, because I am anti-Zionist, that I'm also anti-Semitic? Does it mean I hate myself or people like me? First of all, Semitism is a weird thing because Jews and Arabs are Semites, Palestinians also Semites, so if you're against Palestinians, technically you're also an anti-Semite. It doesn't really matter. We conventionally, after World War II, understand anti-Semitism to be anti-Judaism. So I'm going to use the words interchangeably, but really I'm talking about anti-Judaism, right? Now, there are people out there who are both anti-Zionist and anti-Jewish. Hamas is an excellent example. Hamas, which is a terrible, terrible organization, as I have said a gazillion times already, is both anti-Semitic, which is to say anti-Jewish, and anti-Zionist, which is against the state of Israel and its existence. Okay? You can be both, but you can also be one and you can also be the other. There are anti-Semites, Christians in the United States who are perfectly fine with the state of Israel. So if they hate Jews, why are they okay with Israel? Where there's a lot of people who have talked about why that's the case, but ultimately those things are different. And choosing to not recognize that those two things are different is a little dishonest at this point, because there's been so much dialogue around the difference between Zionism and Semitism, and Zionism and Judaism, and they're not the same. By the way, if they were the same, then how is it that Judaism existed for all these thousands of years without Zionism? We existed as a people for thousands of years without Zionism. Zionism came around in the 1840s, okay? Jews had been in the diaspora at that point for almost 2,000 years. Judaism was doing just fine without Zionism, okay? Sure, people moved back to Israel. They made Aliyah. That's fine. That's true. But it's not the same thing. And for those people, especially people in power who are making that distinction, who should know better, that's dangerous. And the reason it's dangerous, and by the way, it's especially dangerous to Jews. So if you care about Jews, or if you are Jewish, do not conflate the two. Because if you do, what happens then if Israel does something that you don't like? And look, it's a government, okay? Israel is a country with a government that people elect with policy ideas. That doesn't make it the same as Judaism, which is a culture, an ethnicity, a people, a religion. So what if Israel does something you don't like? Then all of a sudden that action that Israel's taken is representative of all Jews? Don't be ridiculous. Governments take political positions. People are distinct. Not all Jews believe the same things politically. And I hope, if nothing else, you take that away from this video. Judaism and Zionism are not the same. Anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are not the same. You can be both. You can be one, you can be the other, but they are not the same. They're distinct things. And the people who tell you that they are the same things are mistaken or lying to you. Okay. That was a lot. So let's talk about the hostages, okay? They're in a terrible situation, and we need to get them back. Every single one of them. If they're dead, we need their body to give them a proper burial and to send them to their home country. Because remember, there's not just Israelis there. There's Americans, there's people from other countries, Germans, there's people from other countries. So we need to get the hostages back. So how do we do that? Okay, so here's a hypothetical. A group of terrorists have taken people hostage in New York City, okay? New York City is gigantic. It's, I think after Tokyo, it's like the second largest city in the world, okay? We don't know where in New York City these hostages are being held. So how do we get them? Well, we do police work, and we talk to people, and we do investigations, and we use the high-tech tools that we have access to, and if we have to, we use special forces, and we clear buildings one at a time until the hostages are returned. You know why? Because doing that kind of work is not going to wantonly kill the hostages. The whole point of taking a hostage is to have leverage. If you allow all the hostages to die, then yes, the terrorists lose their leverage. But at the same time, you've also lost your humanity because you've allowed all the hostages to get killed. People specialize in hostage negotiation. It's a whole field of study. And the reason is because the point of a hostage negotiation is to get the hostages back, not to kill them. If the point of hostage negotiation was just to kill all the hostages and the people taking the hostages, then there wouldn't need to be all this specialized study. You just go in and kill everyone. But we don't want to do that because the hostages are innocent, and we recognize that they're innocent by calling them hostages, okay? And by the way, every single hostage that was taken by Hamas is innocent, okay? And that is my position. I'm sticking to it. If they were, especially because they're most likely civilians, they're innocent, okay? They didn't do whatever Hamas thinks they did to Hamas or the Palestinian people or whatever, okay? So in this hypothetical, do you carpet bomb New York to find the hostages? No, you don't, because that's dumb, because you will kill the hostages. Gaza is the same thing. If you carpet bomb Hamas, if you carpet bomb Gaza, or you bomb huge amounts of Gaza, you're going to kill the hostages. Even if they're in underground tunnels, you're eventually going to hit something that collapses the tunnels. Do you know how big bombs are? Do you know how big the bombs that we sell to Israel are? They're massive. They cause huge amounts of damage. Okay? These weapons are horrifying. So a bomb doesn't find a hostage. By the way, a bomb doesn't even care if someone's a hostage. A bomb just goes off, okay? When it does. It just destroys everything around it. And so that is not the way to find hostages. So what Israel's doing right now, by dropping 6,000 bombs, by the way, 6,000 bombs was the amount that the United States dropped in Afghanistan in a year, in our worst year of bombing. And Gaza is like 1/100th the size of Afghanistan. So 6,000 bombs dropped in like a month. You're going to destroy everything. By the way, you're going to kill hostages. Not to mention all the civilians who've been killed. Okay? And so that's just not the way to do it. By the way, the Hamas leadership isn't even in Gaza. Okay? The Hamas leadership is in Qatar. So Israel, if they really wanted to make an example of the Hamas leadership, go talk to the Qatari government. They're amenable. By the way, Israel has plenty of money and other things it can trade to Qatar for police access. Go in and kill these bastards, okay? The Hamas leadership is about 7-9 people, something like that. Kill them, okay? If you want your pound of flesh, go and kill the leaders. Hell, the BBC can find the leaders of Hamas to interview them. Why can't Israel? Okay? Go in, get them. Everyone, by the way, on October 8th, everyone would have been in favor of that. Every single person would have been in favor of that because they saw what Hamas did to Israel. And by the way, people are talking about exterminating Hamas. Hamas is a guerrilla group. It's an idea. You can't destroy something like that, just like the United States couldn't kill the Taliban. Okay? The United States spent 20 years in Afghanistan trying to kill the Taliban. When we left, it took the Taliban 4 hours. 4 hours to take everything back over. Okay? You're not going to get rid of them. It's an idea. How do you get rid of Hamas? I'll tell you how. Because, and I'm not like some genius, okay? These are other people. Counterterrorism is done through bread and games. And not literally, but you go in, you make people's lives better, and then they root out the enemy in their midst because they trust you. You have to build a relationship with these people, help them rebuild their homes, help them with their food. The single most successful foreign policy venture that the United States ever engaged in was the Marshall Plan. Okay, the Marshall Plan was a huge expenditure of money in Europe after World War II. After we bombed the crap out of a ton of places, okay, we used American money to rebuild Europe. And do you know what happened after that? We had the strongest alliance with those people ever. I'm telling you, if there were any Nazis left over who hadn't fled to Argentina, I'm positive they would have been turned in. Because when you build trust with people, they will turn in the enemy. They will help you. If you help people, they will help you. So the real way to root out the terrorists in Gaza is to make the people of Gaza feel like that they can trust you, and they will turn in the criminals. By the way, people do this for all groups. It's not just doesn't occur in the Middle East. It occurs all over the world. This happens. So you have to build that thing. That's how you get to do real anti-terrorism work. That's how you get rid of a terrorist ideology, is you make the situation on the ground such that people don't want to be terrorists. Okay? But when you bomb whole communities, when you destroy every single member of a family, or every single member of a family except for one, you remove the only barriers that person would have from becoming a terrorist. And so they become a terrorist. You breed more terrorism with this bombing campaign. Okay? And look, Israel is right to feel that they want to get their pound of flesh from Hamas. I get that. I get that. When I saw what had happened, I was mad too. But just wiping out an entire population does not get you that pound of flesh. It just makes you the bad guy. And it makes their numbers way bigger than it was when you started. Kill the Hamas leadership and then make Gaza a place where people want to turn in Hamas members. That's how you root out terrorism. It has always been the way you root out terrorism from the time of the Romans until now. Nothing's changed. Make people's lives better and they will help you. So, yes, Hamas is a terrible organization, and I've said that a dozen times. I'm going to say it a dozen more. There's a really interesting thing going on in the United States and around the world about the numbers of dead who are being reported. Right now, the numbers are over 10,000 dead, with over 9,000 civilians and at least 2,000 children. People always say, "Oh, well, you can't trust the numbers from Hamas." Why not? Do you think every member of the Hamas government is a terrorist? The bureaucrats, the tax collectors, the pipe fitters, the janitorial staff, the people who deliver the mail. All of them are terrorists? All of them are terrorists. Come on. Don't be ridiculous. So, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, Hamas is in charge of Gaza. And so they are the best people situated. They have all the records to provide the information about numbers of dead. I'll give you an example, okay? An equal example where we don't really love the messenger, all right? Afghanistan had a terrible earthquake. I think it was the worst earthquake in their history. It was like a month or two ago. The government of Afghanistan, who is the Taliban, by the way, gave us numbers on the amount of dead, the areas that had been destroyed, what the damage would be, what the damage was, etc. And the rest of the world trusted those numbers right away. You know why? Because whether we like it or not, the Taliban is in charge. They're closest to the data. So you have to trust, and by the way, I work in data, okay? So you have to trust the people closest to the data. Now you can audit that, and independent journalists have audited, and they found, for the most part, that the numbers that are being put out by the Taliban in the case of Afghanistan and Hamas in the case of Gaza are accurate. So you don't have to love the messenger, but you do have to accept the message, because you, as someone miles away who are not doing any work except for to say Hamas bad, therefore their numbers are wrong, therefore they're lying, you have to accept that. You don't have any other way to verify it, and the people who are trying to verify it are doing so. It'd be like if the rest of the Arab world came out on October 8th and said, "Well, we don't trust Israel's numbers about the number of people dead on the 7th." I mean, they're a terrible government who does this. We allege apartheid, who does this apartheid and plans genocide of Palestinians. So therefore, we can't trust their numbers. No, the Israeli government is the closest to the data. So they know how many Israelis and visitors to Israel are dead because they're in charge. Just like Hamas knows how many dead people there are in Gaza because they're in charge. Just like the Taliban knows how many dead people there are in Afghanistan because they're in charge. Now, speaking of Hamas in charge, there's a refrain now from the pro-Israel group, I guess is the thing I can call them, saying, well, if only Hamas had risen up, if only Gaza had risen up against Hamas, then then we wouldn't have this problem. Okay, well, that's a fascinating statement. Let's think about how they would have done that. So, Hamas was elected into power 18 years ago. And you go, aha! They elected them. They hate Jews. They hate Israel. Okay, but if that's the case, why is it that was the last election for 18 years? Half the population of Gaza is under 18. So how are they going to vote out Hamas? How they're going to, they're going to take part in the elections that weren't happening? And by the way, any organization that decides that it doesn't want to have elections are the bad guys in terms of the story of democracy. Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine just said, we're not going to have elections. I don't feel like having elections. I'm sorry, your term's up, bub. And so you might be our friend in the United States in terms of allies, but if you want to continue to be a democracy, then you need to have elections, okay? And you need to run in those elections free and fair. Look, after World War II, the British Empire threw out Churchill, okay? You have to have elections. You have to have elections. And so Hamas depriving the Gazan people, the Palestinian people in Gaza, of the right to have an election is them being the bad guys in the democracy story. Okay, so okay, fine. So they couldn't have an election, that's fine. Well, they should have had a coup. They should have couped them. So you're going to tell me that civilians who are just trying to survive will have the resources and the backing to coup their government on their own with no help? Come on. Come on, guys. So they didn't have the ability. And look, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you can show me that there was enough popular will and there was enough weapons for them to coup Hamas, and they chose not to. But I bet you can't find that, because Hamas is a brutal organization that doesn't really care that much for their people. And so they weren't really. Could you imagine what there was? And even if they did try a coup, you don't think they just mow down all those people? Hamas wants to be in charge, right? They're a terrorist organization. They want power. They demand power. So you're going to end up with that situation anyway. People are not going to attempt a coup like that if they think they're all going to get mowed down. So come on, guys. It just, the things that are being asked of the Gazan people are just kind of ridiculous. So while we're on the topic of the Palestinian people, there's this really big controversy about the slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." Now, I don't like this slogan, okay? Personally, I think it has been co-opted, even if at the beginning, the only intent about it was to be peaceful and to say, one state solution, free rights for everybody, yada, yada, yada. It's all about peace. It really does sound like, and by the way, some people use it in this way that I'm about to articulate too, to say that you should get rid of all the Jews, you should get rid of all the Israelis, and you should destroy the state of Israel. Well, if that's the way that the world sees that slogan, then I'm sorry, you got to find something else. And I get it, people are going to say, oh, well, who are you to say how people can protest and whatever, and that's fine. You don't have to listen to me. You don't have to. That's fine. But that phrase is being interpreted now as a call to genocide against Jews. Okay? And so, ultimately speaking, you need to find a different way to articulate the political aims that you have, because this slogan has been co-opted. And I don't like it either. Now look, I'm sure there are people out there who really do mean well, and I don't harbor any ill will against them. I also think that there should be a one-state solution with democratic rights for everybody, but I'm not going to use "from the river to the sea" language. I see it as problematic, so I'm personally not going to use it. Okay, but that's just me. And so I would recommend that people who believe like I do there should be a one-state solution with democratic rights for all in a secular democracy, just don't use that phrase. I just think it's been co-opted by groups who want to do bad things to Israelis and Jews, and I think in the climate that we have in the world that it's just difficult to change the hearts and minds on that. I think it's better just to find something else that better articulates the political aims. And I get it, it's a slogan. So slogans are meant to be catchy. They're not meant to be super nuanced. And look, we had the same thing with the Black Lives Matter protests in the U.S., right? With abolish the police and things like that. And it was difficult. But once a slogan becomes popularly understood in a way, it's almost impossible to change the public's perception about that. And even if you try, and you can try, I'm not discouraging you to try to, have the peaceful interpretation of it win out. I welcome you to keep trying that. But if it were me, I just wouldn't use that to articulate my aim, to what I think the solution is. So what is the solution? So I mentioned earlier that real anti-terror work is done by helping people, right? So at this point, I think the two-state solution is dead. I think it's been dead for a long time. There's lots of reasons for this, but I think the settlements are the primary one. I think the fears that the nation of Israel has about its neighbors and about how quickly they could get through the nation if the 67 borders were to be used, I think that holds some weight. Ultimately, I think it's going to be very difficult to have a true two-state solution with a lasting peace. So I think the best model going forward is to have a one-state solution with a lasting peace. And here's the part where I'm going to lose a lot of people. I do not think you can call this nation Israel. I don't think you can call this nation Palestine. I think you need to go with a term that is more neutral. Honestly, I think Canaan is probably a good one. Now, Canaan is super biblical, but it is not Jewish, and it's not Arab, Muslim, or Arab, or anywhere else. Canaan is just kind of what it was called, and there's a general agreement in the historical community that it was called that at one point. I think if you had a one-state solution, you could call it that and kind of remove the sectarian religious emphasis from the name. And I think that would be a good start, because then you start to see it as a nation not attached to a particular people, like calling it Palestine, or a particular religion or group by calling it Israel, right? And Israel isn't just the name of a nation. If you look liturgically in Judaism, that name means something different to Jews, right? So that name, just calling the country that name, gives it an interpretation that we wouldn't want for a secular democracy, just like we wouldn't want to call it Palestine for the same reason. So I think you have to call it Canaan, equal rights for everybody, and that includes political rights, land rights, economic rights, social rights, tear down the walls, allow people to live together, participate in an integration process like the United States did after the Civil War, right? And hey, we didn't do it perfectly, okay? But there are places where culturally and ethnically diverse groups of people live together, and they get by, and they do well, and they have reserved seats in the government to make sure everyone's represented. Belgium is the example I'm thinking of, where there are 3 ethnic groups who routinely squabble politically over power, right? But no one's pulling a gun in the Belgian parliament to exact their will. They're having elections, and this Canaan that I envision would be a nation like Belgium, like any other. You'd have reserved seats for the various groups to make sure people are represented. You'd allow enough seats to be contested such that you could have a vibrant democracy where compromise would be necessary in order to advance political goals, to protect the individuals and the nation as a whole. And so I think there is a possibility there, and it's easy to articulate, but it's hard to do. But you really have to start doing that, working towards that solution, because if you don't, it's just going to be conflict forever, in my opinion. You're never going to have a situation where everyone feels safe, because there will always be this tension if you don't give people the right to just live their lives and to execute their rights in a safe, secular place. And again, as I said at the beginning of this video, you can have Jewish tradition be not the law of the land necessarily, but the tradition of the land, right? You can get off with the Jewish holidays, just like in America we get off with the Christian holidays. That's fine. That doesn't make it a theocratic state. You can do that. Turkey is another great example, right? Turkey is a secular democracy. Now Erdogan is trying to change that, but it is a secular democracy. It's a Turkish homeland, but it's not a Muslim country, right? So there are examples to look towards to make a Canaan that is equal for everyone, that allows for people to have and live their lives peacefully and prosperously. And it's possible, but you have to try. But that's a long-term project, right? So what has to happen right now? So right now, we need a ceasefire, and we need Israel to stop bombing, and we need Israel to do the real hard anti-terrorism work necessary to both recover the hostages and to get people to turn over Hamas members, militant Hamas members, to Israel for justice. Now, but Ben, you're not telling Hamas to do a ceasefire. I'd like them to do a ceasefire too, actually. A ceasefire is like tango. You typically need two parties, right? You can have a unilateral ceasefire, but I would like Hamas to do a ceasefire too. I would like them to negotiate in good faith for the return of the hostages in exchange for achievable goals. But they're a terrorist organization, and Israel is a state. And I hold Israel to a higher standard than I do Hamas. I'm sorry, I just do. And not only for that reason, by the way, but also because Israel claims to be a Jewish state. Okay, let me tell you something about Judaism. The most important commandment that God gave us as Jews is to preserve a life. To preserve a life is to preserve the world. That is from the Talmud. In Judaism, there is an exception to every single rule that God gave us, and that exception is to save a life. Not 100 lives, not 1,000 lives. A life. One. So if Israel is going to be a Jewish state, a nation state that practices, that follows in the dictates of Judaism, then they have an obligation under God, under Judaism, to do a ceasefire right now. Right now. This second. This moment. Because for every life they take, they are defiling the most sacred of our commandments. For every innocent life that is taken, the Israeli government defiles our most sacred commandment, for which is the exception to every other commandment that Jews follow. So yes, I hold Israel to a higher standard. Yes, Israel's primarily causing the civilian death at this point with the bombs that we Americans give them. Okay? This video was so hard for me to make. I wanted so much to articulate every nuance, to respond to every critique. No one is going to like everything I put in this video, but these are my thoughts. I had to get them out there. But the most important thing, the two most important things I can say at the end of this video, before I just kind of go cry in a corner somewhere, is ceasefire now, and not with my money, and not in my name. Thank you.